The transport vessel had disintegrated in the upper atmosphere, scattering debris across hundreds of miles of uncharted jungle. Emily had managed to reach an escape pod, her fingers flying across the emergency controls as the hull screamed around her. When she finally crashed through the canopy, branches tearing at the pod's exterior, she had no idea that her companion, Erling, had survived in a pod of his own, landing nearly 3 kilometers to the east. For the first 72 hours, Emily focused solely on survival. The jungle was a living nightmare of biological aggression. Vines moved with predatory intent, their thorns secreting a paralyzing toxin. The air itself seemed thick with spores that made her respiratory filters work overtime. Creatures with too many legs and not enough regard for the laws of physics stalked the undergrowth, their chittering calls echoing through the perpetual twilight beneath the canopy. She salvaged what she could from the pod: a survival knife, water purification tablets, a damaged communicator, and a small emergency shelter. The first night, huddled in that silver thermal blanket, Emily listened to something massive moving through the jungle nearby, its footfalls making the ground tremble. She didn't sleep. By day 4, she had established a rudimentary camp. Using the knife and salvaged metal from the pod, Emily had constructed a raised platform in the crook of 3 massive trees. The elevation kept her above the ground-based predators, and the thick canopy overhead provided some protection from the flying ones. She had discovered that primitive fire scared most of the jungle's denizens. The creatures here had evolved in an ecosystem without combustion. Flame was alien, and therefore terrifying. Meanwhile, Erling had been conducting his own battle for survival. A xenobiologist by training, he approached the jungle with a scientist's curiosity tempered by a soldier's pragmatism. His pod had landed in a clearing created by a fallen giant, and he'd immediately recognized the opportunity. The rotting tree had created a gap in the canopy, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor. Where there was light, there would be different plant life. Where there were plants, there would be herbivores, and where there were herbivores, there was food. He spent his first week mapping the area, marking dangerous zones with piles of stones, and identifying which plants were merely poisonous versus which were lethally so. Erling discovered that the sap from a particular type of bark-bearing tree could be used as an adhesive, and that the large, plate-like leaves from another could be woven into waterproof shelters. He built a lean-to, then a small cabin, then began work on a greenhouse structure to cultivate the edible mushrooms he'd found growing on the fallen giant's trunk. It was on day 16 that their paths finally crossed. Emily had been following a stream, reasoning that water sources might lead to higher ground, or at least 2 areas with better visibility. She'd been tracking what looked like game trails when she noticed something that didn't belong: straight lines. The jungle didn't do straight lines. She approached cautiously, her makeshift spear held ready, and emerged into a clearing that stopped her in her tracks. Someone had built a settlement here. I was wondering when you'd show up, a voice called from above. Emily spun, weapon raised, to see a man sitting on a platform built into the trees. Erling lowered himself down using a pulley system he'd constructed from vine fiber and salvaged cable. "You're human," Emily breathed, relief flooding through her. "Last time I checked," Erling replied with a tired smile. "Erling Hansen, xenobiologist. Your pod crashed west of here, didn't it? I saw the smoke." They shared their stories that night, sitting by Erling's campfire and eating roasted tubers that tasted vaguely like sweet potato. Emily learned about his greenhouse experiments and his theory that the jungle's aggression was actually a defensive response to invasive species, which technically they now were. Erling learned about Emily's engineering background and her ability to salvage and repurpose technology from the wrecked pods. "We could combine our resources," Emily suggested. "Your biological knowledge, my technical skills. We could actually make this place livable." Erling nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that. The jungle isn't our enemy, it's an ecosystem in balance. We just need to find our niche in it." Over the following months, they transformed chaos into something resembling civilization. Emily rigged a water wheel in the stream, generating power for the salvaged battery cells. Erling cultivated gardens of edible fungi and root vegetables, creating a sustainable food source. Together, they built a proper shelter, elevated, fortified. With multiple escape routes and a rainwater collection system, they learned the jungle's rhythms. The predatory vines only moved. During the cooler evening hours, the cheering hunters avoided areas with high mineral content in the soil. The flying creatures were territorial and could be deterred by marking boundaries. With certain pheromone-producing plants that Erling had identified, Emily managed to repair the communicator, enough to send a distress signal on a loop, but both of them knew rescue might never come. The transport had been en route, traveling through an unmapped sector. They might be waiting years, but as Emily stood on their elevated platform one evening, watching Erling tend to his greenhouse while the jungle hummed its twilight song round them, she realized something remarkable. She wasn't waiting anymore. They weren't simply surviving. They were living. The hostile jungle that had tried to kill them both was now their home. They had learned its language, adapted to its rules, and carved out a place within its intricate web of life. They had taken chaos raw, lethal, alien chaos and through patience, ingenuity, and cooperation, transformed it into something sustainable. Erling joined her on the platform. Wiping dirt from his hands, thinking about rescue, he asked. Emily smiled. I was thinking about how strange it is. We crashed into hell and somehow built heaven. He followed her gaze out across the canopy, where bioluminescent insects were beginning their nightly dance, painting the air with living light. Not heaven, Erling corrected gently. Just home, and in that moment, with the jungle alive around them and the stars emerging overhead, Emily couldn't argue with that assessment. They had turned chaos into home, and in doing so, had discovered something essential about what it meant to be human, the ability to adapt, to persist, and to thrive even in the most hostile of environments. The jungle had tested them, and they had answered by refusing to be broken. They had become part of its story, just as it had become part of theirs.